French President Emmanuel Macron says there is no planet B. In other words, we need to take care of planet A. That statement is offered in the spirit of our environmental performance. It suggests we need to change the way we extract, use, and burn the minerals, elements, and fuels of the Earth, or face an uncertain and potentially dire future. The challenge of our time, however, lies in how we shift from where we are to where we need to be. And recognizing at the same time the pressure to maintain our lifestyle and protect the economy will be intense, and it will run right alongside the growing pressure to stop harming the planet. Can science and technology provide solutions? How will we build those devices, design the systems and the vehicles we require? Where do the resources come from, and are there enough essential elements? These are the questions that are being asked at the Resources for Future Generations Conference, an international event dedicated to the availability and delivery of resources to sustain future generations. We invited John Thompson, the chair of the conference, to join us for a conversation that matters about strategies that will identify gaps in our knowledge base, ensuring we meet the needs of future generations.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome to Conversations That Matter. And I think one of the conversations that matters a lot to people right now is, what is the economy of the future going to look like? And so that got me to thinking, well, what's it going to be made of? What are the elements, materials that are going to form the new economy, and how are we going to get them?
So I can't tell you exactly which elements we're going to need and in which place we're going to need them. What I can tell you is we're going to need a whole variety of them, probably most of the periodic table, and we're going to need a lot of them for specific different technologies we haven't even dreamt of yet, and to solve our problems, whether our problems is delivering energy in a better way, whether it's clean energy or even traditional energy. It all requires other materials in order to get the energy from where we extract it, if you like, to us who use it. So that's going to be a whole suite of the normal elements that we know a lot about, the standard elements that we make steel, we make cars from aluminum and steel and so on, through to the special elements, if you like, the new interesting elements that are going to drive batteries like lithium or cobalt and so on, or other things, hydrogen that might be used in fuel cells. We're just going to need a lot of these different materials in order to drive our future economy.
Okay, when you mention each one of those elements, I've heard of all of those elements. We're already using them.
Yep.
So how does that make for a green economy? If those are the materials that we've been using that get us to this place where there are people who say, we're done, how can we be using those same elements in a new economy?
Well, we have no choice but to use them. So the question is not how are we going to use them, the question is how can we extract them more cleanly and more effectively than we are already doing so. And we're not doing a bad job. We get a lot of bad press, sometimes justified, many times not justified. But we have, I think everybody who is in the extractive industries would be happy to agree that we can do it better, and we should do it better, and that should mean more cleanly, less energy, less emissions, less pollution of any kind at all. And that's the only way we can move forward. If we're going to move forward with a clean economy and not have clean materials on the front end of that economy, then it doesn't make any sense. So we have to make sure we produce those kinds of materials.
In your answer to my first question, you said, and we're going to need a lot of them.
We are going to need a lot, and a lot more probably than we use now. Even if we become more efficient, which we should, even if we recycle, which we should, we will still need more, and that's primarily driven by population. We're going to go from 7.5 billion to 9.5 billion people in the next 30, 40 years.
Well, I heard that we may top out at around 11 billion.
Well, that's just the next 20 or 30 years, and then some people optimistically hope that it starts to top sooner, and then there's debate as to when. But 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion more people, just to supply their basic needs so that they can turn on the lights, so that they can heat their homes without burning stuff in the middle of their huts, such that they have clean water and sanitation and education. All of those require just the basic suite of elements that we all just take for granted, the things that are all around us here. And then on top of that, we want to do that in a better way. So they will want solar panels now, perhaps on their huts, because that's going to be a much cleaner way for them to turn on the lights than having it through a grid, if you like. And that solar panel is going to then require another suite of metals, that we have to get from somewhere.
Well, and photosynthetic materials as well.
Synthetic materials, yeah.
And different processes.
The only thing I can tell you for sure, I mean, predicting the future is the only thing you know for sure is you're wrong.
Yeah, because it's a dangerous business if it has anything to do with the future.
Yeah,
that's right.
So I acknowledge that. But whichever scenario you pick for the future, you know it's going to involve new and exciting technologies, because we're very good at creating new and exciting technologies. But they don't come from thin air. They involve materials, and very increasingly more sophisticated materials, in order to do the tasks that we want them to do more effectively, more cleanly, and so on.
So as I talk to you, it's clear to me that you're quite optimistic about the future, and yet I'm sure that there are people who are listening to you right now going, more? Oh my gosh, we've already exhausted the resources of Mother Earth. How can we even contemplate this? How do you manage to have an optimistic perspective in an environment where more and more people are becoming quite depressed about what they believe is the outcome of the current life that we're living?
So I think it's natural. Human nature is to, unfortunately, to be pessimistic. People tend to believe the worst. They read the worst. We're very good at talking about it because it makes great news and drama and so on. And the alarmist ideas are the ones that sell. So I don't, disrespect people for being pessimistic. In fact, the class that I teach a class every year, and I start with 20 young students who are fantastic young people, but they're almost uniformly pessimistic. They look at the world and they think it's not going to work. And so my job is to try and not convince them that they're wrong, but to give them a broader perspective of how the world might work, how we've managed to solve problems, how we have actually developed a better world than we have had in the past, and how we can do that going forward into the future.
So what specifically do you tell them to give them this message of hope and optimism?
So the technical part I regard as relatively easy to explain to them, that there are a variety of sources in the world, that there are new and better ways to extract things out of the ground, that we can do it more effectively and more cleanly, and we have options and we have new ways of doing things. I can convince them that we can make better and better devices, that their phones will be smarter and better and smaller and will use less material. I can convince them, I think, that we can recycle products, even though recycling things out of small devices is going to be tricky. I can convince them that eventually we'll get there, and I think they get that. They can see that piece of the optimistic story. The part that they worry about, and the part that for me is more difficult to give them a sense of optimism around, it is about us. It's how well we as individuals and as humans collectively can work together, both to create those opportunities, but also to implement them in a way that everybody agrees is a good idea.
Got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Sorry for the interruption, but I need your help. I'm asking you to support the show by becoming a patron. That means pledging $1 per show. Conversations is a unique program. There's no grandstanding, no arguing, no yelling. Instead, I sit down with people who have unique insights, specialized knowledge, and experiences that inform and enlighten. And we do this on an incredibly limited budget with a very small crew. Well, this is my office, and it's where I edit the show. And then once it's ready, we give it away. So many different websites around the world are carrying this show, but they get it for free. They don't pay us. So I'm asking you to pledge $1 per show by going to patreon.com/conversations that matter. Thanks. We want to keep producing conversations, and with your help, we can. Now let's get back to the show. Do you believe that we can do that, or do you, not only is it difficult to tell somebody that this is possible, do you believe that it's also difficult to actually do?
I think it's very difficult, but I do think it's possible. And so, I believe that if you work with people and you listen to people, and we're not terribly good at that as humans, it's not our natural inclination, but if you listen to them and you work with them, you have a chance of getting to a position of agreement. And I think in most cases, most of us, from all different walks of life, would agree on about 80% of what we discuss and what we think in terms of what we want from life, what we want from opportunities to work, to be employed, to have a decent living, and so on. We agree on many, many things. We want education for our children. We want a better life at the end of the day. But we disagree on 20, and we get very, very polarized around that 20-odd%.
At times we're willing to go to war.
We're willing to do terrible things over 20%, even if we've agreed with 80%. So bringing people together from the corners, if you like, into the middle, to leave a bit of it behind and have an open conversation of what we agree on, and then how we might implement what is ultimately going to be a better future, and what we're going to have to agree to disagree on, and perhaps what we're going to have to leave behind us in order to get to that better future. Not easy. I'm not pretending for a moment that this is an easy thing to do, or I've got a simple tick the boxes kind of approach.
Well, no, because we live in a very complex world, and interconnected and complex. Do you believe that it is technology and science, though, that will lead us out of this? And how do you explain that in an environment where there are many people who are going, no, it's science and technology that got us into it?
So I believe science and technology can get us out of it, but it's not just by itself. It's not creating a magic widget that solves all the world's problems. It's what we as humans do with the magic widget. So that's creating an understanding about what it's capable of, what the risks may be of doing it, making sure that we can mitigate those risks, making sure that we can economically deliver it to people where they most need it. Those are the pieces of the puzzle we have to get. Just being a scientist working in isolation and being very clever is a wonderful thing, and we need people doing that, and we probably don't have enough people doing that, but it's no good without some pathway out from discovery into society.
So what is that process? How long does it take? Because you can't just automatically go from what we have to what we think we're going to need, because you don't even know for sure that that's going to be the final solution. How does that process play itself out? Does it take intent? And when we hear people say that they're worried about where we're at globally as far as our ability to manage this precious blue marble that we live on in space, do we have to say to them, well, it's not going to be a straight and quick line, it's going to take time?
And I do tell them that. And that's absolutely, it's not only, it's a tortuous line that we take to get these things done, but it is a line. It's not, it's progress, and the line, and most people who try to do these things recognize that there are no quick fixes. The people who give you panaceas are the people I instantly distrust.
Yes.
Because panaceas don't usually pan out.
No. Well, especially in a complex society.
Complex society, exactly. So it's defining that path and being patient and working with it. So if you're in the business of innovation, this is really what innovation is, because innovation isn't creating the widget. Innovation is creating value from the widget.
Improving the widget.
Improving the widget and getting it out into the market. So you've got to persuade people to fund it. And in all innovation, from some point after the creation of the idea, you go through this dip where the idea isn't quite believable yet, and where people don't understand it, and the market isn't very convinced by it, and so on. And somehow you have to get through this, what some people call the valley of death, between the idea and the delivery of that widget into the marketplace.
But there are a number of people who say, we can't afford to go into the valley of death.
Yeah.
We have to stay here.
Right.
What is the opportunity cost that's lost by not taking that trip through the valley of death?
You are going to go through the valley of death if you're an innovator. You can't avoid it. The trick is to minimize it and make sure you have investors who believe in you, who will carry you through that. And again, very easy to say and much harder to do in practice.
Tell me about this conference.
And the nature of the conference is to do exactly that, to look at those three kind of sectors, if you like, and think about how are they going to work in the future. And when we're thinking the future here, most of us think in the future in a few weeks or maybe next year. We're thinking sort of 10 to 30, 40 years out. So we're not talking about the
Which is a reasonable developmental timeline.
Yeah. And the first 10 are relatively predictable, and the current trends give you a pretty good feel for that. And then I challenge anybody once we get out 30 to be able to do anything other than paint interesting scenarios, some of which will be probably closer to the ultimate truth than others. We don't know. So this conference is about getting people to talk about that.
What's it called?
Resources for Future Generations. So it's
exactly our topic today.
It's the perfect topic, and it is the one topic that I think many people will agree that we need resources, and then we'll get very worried about how we're going to do it, or have we got enough? Will the Earth, have we already extracted everything on Earth? Is there anything left? Have we reached the peak supply of all the things that are important? And we're all going to suddenly have to. Well,
that's a valid question. Where are we at on that?
So we have plentiful supply. The Earth's an amazing planet, and I'm originally in Earth science, and so I'm sort of somewhat in love with the Earth, and in all aspects. But it is remarkable how much material there is in the Earth. So although we're extracting a lot, and have extracted more year on year for the last 100 years, we still have plentiful supplies of all the major commodities.
Even coal.
Actually, we have probably more coal than anything else in terms of just sheer quantities of coal.
Because I think in the 1760s or so in Britain, they were predicting that by the end of the century, there would be no coal left in the world. So
we've predicted the end of every commodity every 50 or 100 years or so. So one of the most dramatic was in the early 1970s, was the Club of Rome, predicted the end of various commodities. And if you believe that book, and it's an interesting book, it was at the time, it was an iconic book at the time, but if you believe that, all of the major commodities will be over by now. It would have been over 20 or 30 years ago, but they're not. And so that tells you that we don't fully understand the nature of resources. And we confuse the nature, the physical nature of the resource in the ground with the actual economics of the resource, which what determines whether or not we can extract it. It's one thing to identify it and find it, but then it's got to be economic. Well, if it's not economic, it sits there, and it's still in the ground, it's still there, and at some point in the future it now may become economic, and now it becomes something that we're going to extract. And we forget about that. We don't take that into the calculation when we just look at what we've got right now.
Yes.
So it's an accounting, if you like, an accounting business of trying to understand what's really available. And the bottom line is availability is not the issue. There are many other issues, but sheer availability. So
what are the major issues?
So cost would be a major issue. So it's fine to say we've got it in the ground, but if you can't extract it because it costs too much money, then it's not really there. As far as we're concerned, it doesn't really exist. So then can we change the technology such that we can extract it? So that would be a limitation. Another limitation would be how effectively we can do it without destroying the environment. So can we do it in a way...
Which is fundamentally important.
Fundamentally important to most people. Most people don't want to see a big mess. And I think that's in the 80% of what we all agree on.
Yes.
I mean, we all agree we don't want to destroy our planet. We want to keep it in a way that the future generations...
Well, because there's nowhere else for us to go.
It's as Monsieur Macron said, there is no planet B. So
no, there isn't. I think the closest exoplanet is 4.5 light years away.
Yeah, so
based on current technology, I think it's about an 85,000-year trip.
Yeah. So that's the. Can we do it effectively? And so that is a limitation. If we can't do it effectively, we're not going to get permitted these days. We're not going to want to do it.
Right. And so actually, that brings up an interesting point for me. So if it doesn't make financial sense. Well, then who's going to build the green economy? It's not going to materialize out of nowhere.
Right. So, of course, let's take lithium, which is a hot commodity right now, something that's very important because of lithium-ion batteries look like they're going to be a driver of many electric vehicles and so on. And we believe electric vehicles are coming. We don't know exactly how fast and so on that are going to be the main vehicle of use, but they're certainly on the way in. And we like battery storage. So we need batteries, and lithium-ion batteries are the kind of go-to battery at the moment, and that requires lithium. So can we find and extract lithium both effectively and economically? And the answer is yes. We've got an abundance of lithium. It sits mostly between three countries, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. And there's a lot of it there to be extracted, but it's at high elevation. It's 4,000 plus meters. It's not a very hospitable place, and it's costly to work up there. So are we going to be doing it economically? Well, as demand goes up for lithium, the price goes up, and suddenly it is now economic to go to those remote places and build extractive facilities, do it effectively and do it cleanly, and deliver that lithium to market. Can we do it quickly? No, probably not. We're talking 2, 3, 4 years. So we could have a bit of a struggle with lithium over the next couple of years. And then this new supply will come in, and then we'll be fairly comfortable. And in fact, we tend to have a habit of overdoing it in the resource business. So we may actually end up then producing perhaps a little more than we need, and the price will drop.
And it'll suppress the price,
Exactly, and that's the cycles that, of course, we go through. And for those of us in the business, we kind of live and breathe that cycle and learn how to weather it.
So at your conference, who all is attending and where are they coming from?
They're coming from all over the world. They're coming literally from, obviously North America, Canadians and Americans, but we're having people from Latin America, Australians, Asians, a lot of people coming from Europe. Europe is very concerned around some of the commodities we've been talking about, what they call the critical elements, critical metals, critical materials that are going to drive the clean economy and so on. And they don't have supply. So they're going to be looking elsewhere in the world to a large degree for that supply, and they want to understand where they need to go and how they're going to find and locate it and purchase it or whatever.
And who are the presenters?
Presenters are a range of people from scientists, engineers on the technical side. So about probably of the technical part of the conference, which is a lot of little discrete sessions on specific topics, about 2/3 of them will be technical. So they'll be looking at the nature of the earth, the nature of the resources, how we extract the resources. Where is the water? Where are the minerals? Where is the energy going to come from? What's the contribution of new clean energy, renewable energy versus traditional energy sources and so on? So that'll be about 2/3 of that part of the conference. And then 1/3 will be the people part. And the people part is all the societal issues. So that starts with governments and regulations and the role of governments in regulating and controlling resource extraction, both from an extractor point of view and an environmental point of view. And then the social questions. So that's with dealing with communities, specifically Indigenous people, because Indigenous people have a much closer bond to the land than many people, although many communities all over the place also are very concerned about the land around them, but they don't have the same sense of ownership often that Indigenous people do. So we'll have those people in the room, and the idea is to generate the conversations that we've been having, but even the more difficult ones, because they won't necessarily agree with us on a bunch of things.
If we want to have the economy of the future, yes, we've talked about the elemental table and so on, but I can't help but think the most important resources in the room are the minds of the people who want to take on this challenge and solve it.
Yeah. So in my conference, I shouldn't say our conference, Resources for Future Generations, they are the people who are going to determine. I'm not going to determine what things look like in 10 to 40 years' time. So who are the people who are going to worry about how we find these things, how we extract them cleanly, how we talk to each other and how we meet with the Indigenous people or the other communities, how we perhaps change the business relationship that we have traditionally always done with mining to a different business relationship where Indigenous or communities are bringing their own enterprises on a more of a, if you like, a joint venture basis than a more of a, a community company basis to the equation. So what's that going to look like? And in the meanwhile, we're going to be having less workers probably at these mine sites because we'll be automating and we'll have more digital technology that's coming now. That's not even a future thing, that's actually happening right now. And so that means that our traditional way of providing employment for the local communities or Indigenous people at the mine is not going to be the same. So how are we going to change that? How are we going to find businesses or help them create businesses that will service the operation such they make a living and provide employment opportunities outside of the mine, and so that those perhaps are sustainable after the mine goes.
So these are global challenges. Why do this in Vancouver? Like, do we have the resources that we need here to be able to address that?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, first of all, why do it in Canada? So Canada is a resource nation. We don't always like to acknowledge that. Some of us do more than others. But it is. We were built on resources, and it's still a very substantial part of our economy. And I think most people acknowledge that. Some people don't like it, but they acknowledge it. But all people, I think, would agree that if that's the case, we should do it well, and we should do it better and better year on year. So we're a resource nation. Vancouver is the home to a substantial part of the mining community in Canada. So certainly from the front end, from the exploration end of the business, we have many mining companies of all sizes, a lot of small ones, but right up to major companies who go out and look for the resources of the future. And then we have a lot of the technological and scientific support functions between universities and colleges and contractors, consulting groups, all here. And then just over this mountain range that's to our east, we have an energy hub. That's generally the traditional energy hub. That's the oil and gas well. But increasingly in the oil and gas world, we're seeing them embrace renewables as part of what they do. So there are a lot of wind farms in Alberta, and quite a number of those are owned by the major oil and gas companies or energy companies, if you like to think them about that way. So while it's harder for them to grapple with that transition, perhaps because they're living through it, than it is for us, they recognize these transitions are coming.
Thank you very much for coming in and doing this.